Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. It looks like we're starting about 30 seconds a little late. Apologize for that. Thank you for attending our 201 training today. This really gives us a little bit more of an advanced look at how Domotz works. Before we get started into that, let's go over a couple of things here. First of all, this is live. We do want you to ask questions. We've got guys standing by to answer questions that come in. Take advantage of that go to webinar control panel, and under the questions section, type any questions that you have. If they're relevant, we'll answer them at the time. If they need to be held off to the end, we will do that. And if for some reason we can't get to it just because of sheer numbers, we will do our best to respond via email afterwards. Of course, you're always invited to email support@domotz.com as well. Our team is always standing by to answer your questions there. Okay, so that being said, here's a little bit of what we want to go over. First of all, we'll do a quick recap of the 101 stuff that we talked about, and then we'll get into some of the reporting and logging aspects of Domotz. Some of these are still, I would consider to be basic features that I'm talking about right now, which includes the network diagnostics and performance and even some of the security. We'll touch on managing all of your agents, but I have to say this is probably the last broadcast where we'll talk about it at this level. With some of the new features that we have coming out, we'll start to add a little bit more when we talk about monitoring tables and whatnot. But this will at least give you a preview into that and how you can manage all your agents. We will then go into some more of the advanced features like device sensors, or when we discover a device on the network, setting up SNMP or TCP service checking on those devices. We'll get into some of more of the advanced alerting as well. So we certainly talked about personal alerts and I guess from that aspect, email or push notifications to the mobile app. But here we'll talk about shared alerts and configuring those and where to get information about that. We'll talk about some capabilities you have with the alerts as to consolidating alerts into a single digest, and then also snoozing alerts. So if you have a job site that you know you're working on, or you want to stop receiving alerts because you know it's in a troubled state, we will talk about how to do that as well. And then lastly, we'll focus on setting up services, external services in particular, things for Cisco, Meraki, Ubiquiti, things like that, and where to get information on that. With all that being said, we really don't need to do much more except go into a demo. By the way, I've got Giancarlo standing by here. Giancarlo, feel free to interrupt me if any questions come up from our customers.
Thanks, Stevie.
Yeah, a couple of things that I do want to talk about briefly on our recap. First of all, we talked a little bit about account configuration and team management and setting up identity access management. A lot of those things had to do with two-factor authentication or multi-factor authentication, as well as single sign-on services. I do want to iterate that that's very important for you guys to help maintain security within your environment. It should go without saying at this point, but I still feel compelled to talk about that and make sure you guys are aware of it. We of course talked about how you configure an agent. You should understand now that there are many different ways that you can establish an agent onto a network. So you've got a software-based agent that can be hosted on Windows or Linux servers. You can put agents on embedded systems like Raspberry Pis. You can even host an agent out in AWS Cloud if you are worried about monitoring cloud services that are running actively out there. All of those are some of the advanced features, but I want to also point out that you can find all sorts of information at help.domotz.com regarding those agents in particular in the setup of those. Once the agent is set up, we talked a lot about the device properties, so how we discover devices and then allowing you to configure the device information to be a little bit more strict with your documentation or your company's processes and how you do naming conventions and nomenclature. And then The other thing that we talked about, as I mentioned previously, was kind of the general alerting and how that works, as well as, if something goes wrong, how do you connect to these devices? Today we're going to be talking a lot more about reporting and logging and really the diagnostic aspects of what Domotz can do, and then how to configure these shared alerts. So with that being said, let's get into the reporting and logging section. First of all, I always like to use, I think I can use this site here. I'd like to say that communications with your customers is always critical. People have heard me talk in the past about the certain paradox that the recovery paradox, which talks about how a customer will be upset if a problem goes down or a system goes down on the network. They'll want to blame you. But keeping in communications, properly communicating with the customer and whatnot, is how you help maintain that relationship and actually build up rapport with your clients. One of the ways that we think that also helps build up rapport is to continuously report to your customers on how systems are doing, even when they're not in a troubled state. Under your dashboard, and when you go into a particular site, you'll see the Login and Reports tab. If you click on that, this is where you start to see all the details about what you can report on. We did talk about in the 101 section about how you can set up your account and set up the billing information or the branding information, which is useful for the account info, and the billing info, which is useful for your branding purposes. So if I bring that up here, you can see how you set this information up. You can put your logos in here. This information is the same information that gets put directly into these reports that you are wanting to provide to your customers. When you go to the report tab, you'll notice that there's a couple things you can do. You can set up manual reports, or you can set up automatic reports. The automatic reports essentially will send out at the first of each month if you have it configured to do so. Of course, it'll send it to any of the names or emails that you have set up on this system. And just like the manual reports, it will put in the types of information that you want to have set with this. If you want to get information about what this is, take advantage of these little help windows on each side so you can understand what it's doing. But effectively, you can get information about the agent itself, how long it's been up or online. You can show connection history, which is really how often the thing went up or down, or any problems that this system had on it. You can look at the WAN performance. This effectively is the ISP speed test that we talked about previously. Okay, and any information that there may be around latency, you can put all of that type of detail in here. A lot of the details here around devices and whether you classify them as important devices are made available in these reports. And I think one of the more important things are actually the activity logs. So this is something where you can provide information to your customer or to your team about who has been logging into the system and what they've been doing when they're in the systems. Essentially, this logging tab that's at the top of the page here gets put into those reports, and that information is what's stored. You see the account that logged in, you see what they did, how they accessed it, as well as the date and a timestamp associated with that. From my perspective, this type of reporting is really good if you have an SLA in place with your customers to let them know that you are actively maintaining services with their company. It's also a great way for you to audit and understand how your employees are accessing these systems. So this is useful if you ever need to go back and look at, when something went wrong, who was the last person in there, what happened, etc. A couple things I would point out here in the logging section. We have this exports tab as well. I believe we showed how through the web app you can export all the devices, but this is another way in which you can do that. Exporting all the devices that are on the network are extremely useful when it comes to making sure that your cybersecurity posture is appropriate. Most of the time, most cyber health processes require that you have a good understanding of what's on your network. Well, Domotz can do that effectively. I mean, obviously, we've talked before about how we identify and classify all the devices on the network, but then being able to generate this into a CSV file, or as we talked about before, being able to export that device list through the desktop application into an Excel file is another way in which you can get all this information, as well as the network-based information around that device, such as its IP address, its MAC address, any of the connection issues that may have had with it. So I'm not going to go into too much detail around that because we talked about that in the 101 class, but I just wanted to make sure you're aware that this is here and available to you. So that's probably enough on the reporting and logging. I think you guys get the basics of that. Next thing I want to talk about are a little bit more focused on network diagnostics. In particular, we'll talk about not only the WAN side, but we'll also talk about the internal LAN side. You'll notice on this particular agent here, we've got a network performance tab. This device is running on a simple Windows machine, if I remember correctly. We've got the speed testing here, so over this cable system, that you can see it gets tested once every 6 hours. In this particular case, we're using MLab as our speed test variant. I do want to point out that the speed test can get disabled. We get a lot of questions on that in case people don't really care about the ISP speed test. The other thing that I want to point out is that many times users are leveraging Ookla or speedtest.net for those services. And for many ISPs, Ookla places servers directly at the ISP or the head end of the ISP. We don't feel that that is as much of a benefit to you as using a service like MLab or FAST. The reason we say that is because when you're using MLab, it's actually going out to servers that are hosted on external sites. And it's those services that really give you a true throughput, not only to the ISP, but from the ISP out to a particular service as well. So keep that in mind as you do this. I will also say, and there's this nice help document, there's many reasons why the internet speed test coming from this agent may not be as reliable as you would expect to see from a PC or laptop. There's a lot of factors that are included with that, but we call that out in this information. So I encourage you to read it if you're concerned about some of the speeds you're seeing from the agent point of view. It really does depend as well as whether you're using a Raspberry Pi or you're using a NAS drive or you're using a high-end Linux machine that is running that test. Okay. So those are useful information. By the way, you have this historical chart that can show the performance of these systems over the course of time, and you can see degradations. I'll also point out here that information on the public information available to, as the agent sees it, is also available through these different tabs. If you want to get into some route analysis and start doing tests across the WAN, you can do that as well by going to specific services. Some simple ones we call out, like Spotify, Facebook, and Google, are commonly used for this purpose. Let's talk a little bit about round trip delay. So Domotz will ping every single device that is on the network that is being monitored. In fact, you'll notice in this particular network that most of these systems in the equipment closet, which are all hardwired, have a pretty low round trip delay. But if we find a wireless device that is active on the network, let's see if there's one like this. So what we see here is that there's a variation. This is a wireless device that I believe is in standby mode. But essentially what we're doing with these round trip delay testing is that we're doing ICMP echo requests, also known as a ping test. We do this once every 30 seconds, and we capture that data and record the performance that we see by that particular device, and we'll track that over the course of a month time. In fact, here's a good example where we saw a variation all of a sudden start occurring. I don't know what may have caused that, but something on the network obviously changed the behavior of this particular device. So This gives you an idea of what you can do and see here with these types of systems. The idea behind this really is to figure out what has changed on the network, or if behavior has changed, why has it changed, and what can be done about that. You can set alerts on these round trip delays, which we talked about that in the 101 class, so I won't go over that in great detail. But it's important to note that we try to classify the median latency based on what we're seeing on average. And we say, hey, this is probably a good value that you should use to see that the device has become out of bounds or into a bad state. Same with packet loss, right? We make some assumptions about packet loss based on the device, but you can set those manually if you wish to change that. If you have a critical device and you want to make sure no packet loss is occurring, you absolutely can go in and set that. I would tell you that this is a great way to get device visibility into your system and checking the loading on the network. But I'd also point out that if your router or firewall that you're using is configured to filter ICMP requests, okay, it may not be useful for you, as you can imagine. So you have to make sure that the network is configured appropriately, so that way all of these ICMP requests are going through and prioritized appropriately for these systems. So that's just something I wanted to point out. One other thing that I would like to point out here, and I don't think on this particular site, well, maybe we do actually have this as a testing. Here's a particular site where we have an external site that's set up. You can see that we are doing a round trip delay testing all the way to that site, probably hosted in Italy as it is a .it. This is a great way in which you can also check the performance of external systems, okay, and look at the latency between the agent itself and an external host. I've used this before for checking things like Blue Gene servers. You can, of course, check Google if you want to just check that continuously and then make sure your performance, at least from a latency perspective, is what you would expect. Or if you see any drastic changes to that, you can go in and adjust your configurations as appropriate. When it comes to setting alerts on these types of systems, we talked a little bit about how we calculate these numbers, but a couple things I do want to point out to you is that really setting latency alerts is probably more important on devices that are structured towards unified communications or voice over IP. Setting alerts on Wi-Fi or Wi-Fi based devices, or even sleepy devices like ones that use low power Wi-Fi, probably not the best idea, and you're going to get a ton of drop packets and see performance degradation. That is perfectly normal. So keep that in mind when you are dealing with that. One last thing I'll point out is that latency is not necessarily a bad thing, unless you're, of course, dealing with games or you care about, strict performance. But variation in latency is usually what causes behavioral issues, so especially for voice over IP or unified communication systems. So just keep that in mind if you take advantage of some of these network diagnostic tools like latency or round trip delay. All right, let's talk a little bit about network security. We have this tab in the upper right corner of our agents, and I want to talk a little bit about that. So first of all, Domotz is not a SOC. We never claim to be a security operations center, but because we are monitoring the network, we feel it's important to make you aware of what's on the network. And as I mentioned before, most security processes that you go through, whether it's NIST or CMMC or SOC, any of those types of ISO 27001, they all require at some level for you to understand what's on your network and how those devices are behaving on the network. And Domotz is an extremely useful tool for understanding that. The other thing that we do is we look at vulnerabilities that are on the network. We look at things like which ports are open on the network. On this one, I have it paused. But if you enable this, what it does is from the cloud side, it looks back into the network and it looked for any TCP ports that may be open at the router or the firewall level. And then in the same vein, we use UPnP to understand, or we look for devices that are requesting UPnP ports to be open. Most of the time, we recommend that your router or firewall, whatever that service is that may be serving up UPnP, is disabled. Most systems do not need UPnP anymore, but should you need it and should a device on your network make a request for it, Domotz will discover that. In fact, we used to, well, I may not have an agent right now that has that. This may be an example here where we've got security issues, for UPnP. So you can see here that will show information like which device is making this request, which ports are being opened, and at what time. You can accept or reject these as needed, but the idea behind this is that you're at least getting an understanding of what's going on in the network. And likewise, you'll notice that we have a new devices discovered section. So anytime a new device shows up within the last 24 hours, you can generate an alert. And of course, we keep a history of that as well, so you can see what these devices are and when they showed up, et cetera. Again, all part of your good cybersecurity health. One thing that I would point out is that alerting on new devices is extremely useful when you have more private networks. Private networks being ones that are maybe segmented off for security reasons, segmented off for point of sale systems, segmented off for even digital signage or other systems that may be on your network. The idea behind those private networks is you know that there should be a static or a fixed number of devices on that network. And if for some reason there are new devices showing up on that, you should be alerted and get awareness of that. This is very helpful for, especially on security systems or point of sale systems for things like PCI compliance. So making sure that there's no new devices showing up on there that would be scanning those networks. Okay, I think, let me see if I touched enough on this. Looks like we did. Okay, let's talk about managing all your devices before we get into the real meat and potatoes of what we want to do here. So Domotz as a dashboard, you can see has, this map or this NOC screen, this Network Operations Center view that shows all of your sites that are out there. But in many instances, you want to be able to look across all your sites or find devices across all your sites at one time. We've created on the left-hand side on the menu bar this search and manage feature. The idea behind this is you can look either by device or by agent and look for very specific items. So if I wanted to look for all of the Cisco devices that I happen to be managing across all my networks, I could just type the word Cisco. And even if I wanted to get more detailed and say that the model is an SG350, I think I have SG350s in here. I do not. I do somewhere. I just don't remember how I named them. But if I look at a model that is an SG, let's see what this says here for the model. Oh, there was no dash in it. So if I would have searched for SG350, this would have shown up, and any other devices that have SG350 in there would have shown up. When I do this, and the idea behind this is after I've discovered all the devices that I care about, I then can do things like understand what their system properties are. Okay, so we could take this particular switch that we click on, and we can see how it's configured from a device settings perspective, from the Domotz point of view, as well as its properties, such as its name, what type of device it is, the model, and even some of the location information. The beauty of this is if I have this particular device at this site set up as kind of my ideal use case, or call it my template, I can save off this information. I can export these device settings to my desktop, and then I have the ability to let's say deselect this, but let's find another SG350 that's on here that I'd want to import, and I can import that information. So I go through and select that file that we just saved off, and then it comes through and asks me what of these do you wish to put back onto this new device, whether it's the name, More importantly, it's usually the SNMP sensors, the TCP sensors, any authentication that you do with SNMP or credentials for that device, because a lot of times people will use common credentials or authentication methods across different sites. So you can take that directly. You can do this to one or many devices all at one time, and Domotz will push all that. So this is just a nice, easy, fast way for you to essentially template systems that you use across all of your customers. Or if you want to make mass edits to systems, you can do that here. In fact, let's say you have a particular customer that is named Demo for whatever reason, and you want to go in and change their name, okay, to be something that maybe they change their name, or you want to make an adjustment to their agents as a whole. You can do that even at the agent level. It's important to note that any shared alerts that you want to push between your oh yeah, he heard you say that. So any of these systems that you want to push across, like shared alerts and stuff, you can do that pretty easily through the Domotz agents. So okay, enough on the simple stuff. All right. Okay, good. I think we have things taken care of. So let's go and talk about some of the more detailed stuff here. We're going to talk a little bit more about, away from all the management stuff, but more of the advanced features like interrogating devices on a network. So the first thing I want to do is go to the Draper site here. The way in which you can really take advantage of Domotz, aside from the discovery, aside from the basic alerting of online, offline status of devices, is that you can really get into each individual device, and assuming it has things like simple network management protocol, or it's using TCP services like web pages, SSH, Telnet, we can get in there and see a lot more detail about the devices. Let's look at this device in particular. So inkjet printer, nice, simple. Everybody's got a printer. This is a LaserJet, I guess, on it. One of the things that you can do with this is go into SNMP, and you can set up your system. You can add SNMP sensors to look at very specific features within the MIB files, okay, the management information database that's there. You can pull up things that are specific to that device, and then of course you can set alerts on that. For an for a LaserJet printer or a printer in general, you usually can type things like toner, or you can type the color like black for if you want to look at something specific to that. You can add these tables. One thing that Domotz does for you, which makes it nice and simple, is that we have amassed thousands of MIBs into our database. So when we discover that a device is on the network and there's an associated MIB to it, we make it as easy as possible for you to search for the OIDs that relate to that particular sensor that you're looking for. So even if you wanted to type the word like cyan, you would start to see, again, the colorant table come up. And then you can add that. Now, I have a lot of these already set, so I'm just going to close this out. But you can see how we can add specific MIBs, or excuse me, specific sensors that relate to the toner levels that are in here. And then we also have a historical graph of these, so you can see how over time this particular cartridge, which are fairly new, are starting to decrease based on usage. You can then set alerts on these. So if you want to get to the point where you say, let's go set up a personal alert on the black toner level. So we can say when the black level cartridge is less than 20%, right, trigger a particular alert, right, send an email out. So this is how you can start to leverage these things. You can also look at NAS drives. So somewhere in here, I think I have Synology NAS drive. You can go into SNMP. You can start putting in things like hard drive utilization that's in there. You can look at the CPU system itself. You can, in fact, another device that we have here that I usually show is this temperature sensor. So this essentially is looking at temperature and humidity within a rack. Oh, I don't know why my graph didn't show up here, but let's look at it on this. I know this works. So, but this just shows you the power of these types of. There we go. SNMP. Yeah, they're showing different values. So something must have changed there on that particular agent. But this is where you can see different temperatures and again, setting up alerts based on values that you care about within a particular system. All right, another type of alert that you can have, which we think is extremely useful when it comes to understanding the status of a server, understanding if media services are running on particular servers, or even if there are certain command line interfaces that you care about are working. You can do what we call TCP checking. So I know that this particular device actually has a web page that we can go into, support 80. If I wanted to make sure that that service was constantly running on this, I could easily set up TCP service by typing in a port, so port 80 in this case, and then I can hit add. So now what Domotz is doing is, as you can see by the sample time on this particular agent of once every 5 minutes, I can go out and ping this device and make sure that, and actually ping this port, right? Look for the status of this port and make sure that the service is available. I will check that it's there, and again, I can alert if that system goes down or not in this case. So another useful tool, we often see this getting used on desktops and laptops. If I go back to this particular site, you can imagine that if I had a server running and I needed to make sure that RDDP was on that, I could then put that here and make sure that that's up and running. Here I'm checking that Microsoft Remote Desktop Protocol is actually running on 3389. A couple of new things, and I have to apologize. I've changed some configurations in my system, so I'm not able to show you this in real time on these particular machines. I'm sure that on our webinar that we do on Thursday, we're going to go into great detail about this, but that has to do with OS management. One of the newer features that we've released is the ability to interrogate a Windows machine or interrogate a Linux-based machine and see things like what OS is running on it, what version of these, what patches are applied to it, really just give you an idea of the server architecture. And we're going to talk a lot more details about that on Thursday, but then hopefully in the next couple of weeks, I can have the system unlocked so that we can actually show that here. But we have lots of information on help.domotz.com if you go under OS management, so you can see what's going on there as well. So that's also some of the things that we're doing to interrogate these devices a little bit more. Let's talk a little bit about advanced alerting. When we talk about that, we're really talking about our shared alerts that we have. So if under the left-hand side, if you click on the alert settings page, this is where you can get to where you can configure some of the details about personal alerts. But in this training, we wanted to talk a little bit more about shared alerts and how this works. We call it a shared alert because of the fact that you can share what we call channels that can receive notifications from an event that occurs in the Domotz environment or at the agent level. Examples of channels would be PSA tools, so your professional service administration tools. It could be ticketing systems that you have. We can also do channels that are messaging systems, so things like Microsoft Teams or Slack you can configure. Telegram is another one that's out there and useful. You can also consider a channel to be just a general email. So support@mycompany.com or second@domotz.com, as I have here in this example here. These are all ways that the Domotz agent or the Domotz service can communicate with you to let you know that an event that you care about has occurred on a particular network or device. You can configure more than one contact channel per shared alert that's out there as well. Like on this one, I have a Microsoft Teams message going out, as well as a ticket getting created in a data sandbox that we have. The way in which we do this is that we will first, let's actually talk about the channels themselves. But first, you need to set up which channels you want to have communications with. So all of these have different ways of setting them up, but essentially you need to connect your account that your PSA tool or your ticketing system account to the Domotz agent. This is typically done by sharing of APIs or URLs with username and passwords as appropriate. I would point out that under help.domotz.com, there are all sorts of information about how to get these services set up and these systems set up. So I encourage you to visit help.domotz.com. In fact, since I'm not going to set this up, I'll point out on this right here, once you add the credentials, the thing that Domotz does is it will go and try to correlate your agents that you have within the Domotz environment with all of the different service agreements or the systems that are set up. In this case, ServiceNow calls them assignment groups that your environment is configured with. You need to associate the agents with the appropriate group. And once you've done that, then you will be able to start setting up or taking the next steps on creating the shared alerts. Each one of these are quite different, so I'm not going to go into details about setting up individual ones, but I am going to make sure that you understand that this Domotz user guide is definitely the most helpful way for you to configure a particular system that's out there. The same goes for setting up Slack notifications or Microsoft Teams on that. Once you have these channels set up, you can go in, create the alert. You'll want to name the alert. If you want to color code it for purposes of identification, you can certainly do that. And then if the next step is you add the contact channels that you just configured, and you can set up multiple shared alerts. You can have some that have just one contact channel, some that have multiple. You can set them up for different event types. But once you have those named and configured the way you want, you set up which events you would like to have trigger the shared alert. So in this example that we have, device goes up, device goes down, any configuration changes that may happen at the network level or at the network infrastructure level. We can even come down here and say, if there are new devices discovered, if there are public IP addresses that has changed, we can set alerts on that and send that information out to the specific channels that you care about. So there's a lot of capabilities here within these shared alerts when it comes to configuration. Once you have created the shared alerts that you care about, the very next step is to go back into an agent where you want to set up that shared alert and associate that shared alert to the devices. You can either do that from the device itself, or if you go to the alert settings tab, you also can come in here and configure specific shared alerts, like this one that we were just looking at. If I want to add that to this particular agent, I now have that added, and you can see that when the connection is recovered or lost, so when an agent is considered down from our point of view, a ticket will get created as well as a Microsoft Teams message will come across. So this essentially is how you set this up. You can add more than one shared alert depending on what the shared alerts may do to, oh, there's no monitored events in this one, so that's not very interesting. This one here. So you can see now we have multiple shared alerts that are associated with particular events here. So that's very possible for you to do too. Okay, I'm going to delete these so we don't mess up this system. Let me make sure that I covered the shared alerts information that I think are important to you. Yes, one thing that you can do within a particular agent, okay? In fact, I think it's important that we talk about this, is one is you can enable or disable alerts specific to the agent at any one point in time by hitting the alert disable button. You will notice, I'll just cancel out of this, you'll notice that you have also this alert setting, which is at your account level. Okay, so under personal alerts, you can actually disable that this particular account that I'm logged in as, jbfowler@gmail.com, will stop receiving alerts altogether. Okay, so that's something that you can stop also. But in this case, I would do that if I was maybe going on vacation, but the team still needed to get stuff. Of course, if you're a team master, you can disable things for everybody. If I go into my agent alerts, I can, as I said, I can disable that specific agent's alerts, but you'll also notice that I have the ability to snooze. So if this particular site was under construction, or we knew we were working on it, or we were going in and doing actual maintenance, and we didn't want to get any alerts when we took a switch offline or we took the ISP down, whatever was needed. You can set it up so that this agent will essentially remain off, or will disable the alerts for a very particular amount of time. You can either set it to be a very specific date and time that it comes back online, or you can say that, hey, this is going to be down for the next 8 hours, if that's what you wish to do. So you have the ability to set that as well. You can then snooze all these. You'll notice that it will actively say that this is snoozed. And what you should see out on the site is that there's this little bell that says no bell, right? No alerts. So this site is snoozed for everybody at this particular time. So that's just something that you can get in and configure here. The other thing that I want to talk about capability-wise, let's re-enable this. It'll tell you if you want to enable it or edit the snooze if you want to send it longer. The other thing I do want to talk about has to do with digests and your daily digests. So if I go to my account, we've recently added all these awesome new features, right, with the new page and menuing, which we're going to talk a little bit about on Thursday as well. When I log in here, I should see that I can create a Domotz daily digest for alerts. What this is you have the ability to set a very specific window such that all alerts that come from your agents that are under your account can be consolidated into a single email and then sent to you. You can do this on a daily basis. Maybe you want to set up all the alerts, but let's say you're a manager and you don't need to get proactive alerts all the time. You just want to get a summary and you want to be able to sort and say, okay, these particular sites had the most alerts and whatnot. You can do that into a single email. You essentially can set it up such that it'll send it to you at a very specific time of the day. It will consolidate, in this example where you do one time per day, it will consolidate all the alerts that occur under the agents you control for that 24-hour period, and then it'll send you that digest at the time you specify. You also can set it up to be a time window. So if you want proactive alerts during your normal office hours, let's just say 9 to 5, between 5:01 and 8:59, you want to consolidate it, you can do that. At the end of the day, or at the end of that consolidation period, so it would be, in this case, 8:59 a.m., it would then send you that digest showing you everything that happened over that time window. So this is useful if you are dealing with support systems, or you have a support tickets, or you have a team that are on different hours. You can set this thing up so that it makes sense to you to get a summary. So we talked a little bit about shared alerts. We talked about the alert daily digest, as well as snoozing and disabling these alerts. The last thing that I want to focus on before we get to any questions that may have popped up has to do with setting up of external services. So when you are in your Domotz agent, and I think we want to go, let's focus on this site first. Anytime that Domotz discovers a device or a system that is on the network that has external services that can be configured for it, we will bring awareness of that to you. Under the Devices tab, you'll see that on the right column that there is this Devices External Services button that shows up, and you can see I can edit it here. When I click on this, what we recognize is that we have a Cisco Meraki access point in this system, and we can set it up such that this account can be associated to it. I don't have credentials for this, otherwise I would do this for you, but essentially you will add the Meraki cloud information just like before. The API key and the organization name that's associated with that API key. Once you add that, you will get more detailed information about what's going on in this particular system itself. For wireless access points like Meraki and Ubiquiti, you're typically going to get more details about the wireless access points, things like signal strengths, things like noise floor, devices that are physically connected to these devices, what those devices' RSSI values are at the point of the wireless access point. So these are the types of systems that we have. Definitely recommend you check out help.domotz.com. For those that are familiar with community.domotz.com, we also have information there about what external systems that we can monitor in that. Let me make sure that I covered all of this before we get to, oh yes, documentation and other services. I did want to mention that as well. So under this left column, under services and drivers, here you will see the list of available integrations that we have. At the very top, you'll notice which services are actually connected to that agent or your account that you are using and signed in as. But then we have all sorts of other integrations that you can add to this. A couple things I'll point out. When there is a plus sign that's on this is typically because Domotz has done the integration, whereas when there is an arrow, this is from the third party has done the integration. Most of these are being done by third parties with these integrations. But you can add services like documentation tools, aggregation platforms like LionGuard, or even customer documentation systems like Cloud Radial, and you can take all of the information that Domotz is gathering that we've showed and pull that into their system, making it really, really nice for you to enhance your managed service platform. We've talked already about the ticketing systems, but again, these are the types of systems that are there that you can integrate into. One thing that we didn't talk much about, although we've talked about in some of our more technical webinars, but the ability to take and integrate with services like Node-RED or Power BI, and I think we'll have some more platforms that we are going to be talking about here in the near future. So that being said, I think I've touched on everything that I wanted to from a 201 perspective. I do want to remind everybody that help.domotz.com is absolutely your best resource to go to when it comes to understanding how a lot of these integrations that we've shown or talked about work, and then also how to get into some of the different documentation systems that are out there. Of course, I want to say also, if you need help, by all means, email support@domotz.com and they will help you there. And then the last thing I want to point out is our YouTube channel, and if you go to domotz.com and go to our webinars section under the resource tab, you will see technical webinars that we have that show a lot of the latest videos that we've put out. And we have some videos on some of these other services that are there. We do have, I'll make a mention, we do have our new features webinar coming up on Thursday. So I invite you to sign up for that. It should be a good one. We're going to talk a lot about the things that we've done over the last year, but we're also going to be showing you some new things like these monitoring dashboards, which we're going to probably try to incorporate into the 201 webinar soon, but also talk about some of the custom plugins and driver features that we're talking about. So two very exciting things. All right, Giancarlo, I know I had to speed through a lot of that. We have a few minutes left that we can address any questions that may have come up. What do you have for us?
Thanks a lot, GB. You actually were covering one of the questions I was going to ask, because so Ken just a few minutes ago asked the following question: how can I customize, or how do I customize the view of devices on the dashboard page? And that's funny, because yeah, that's exactly the topic that we will cover on Thursday webinar. And you anticipated that one, that we just introduced this monitoring dashboard, which allows you to create your own tables with the list of devices that you wish and the information that you want to represent for every single device in that table. On the other hand, what I told Ken, the default dashboard, the one that we call device list, cannot be customized. Just because that's how we represent the data. You mentioned, JB, that our front end, our UI, is available in the web interface. It's available on a desktop app, and it's also available on a mobile, which is very, very useful when you are on the field, when you are helping your customer on site, or you are just in the airport waiting for your next plane, no?
Yes.
Now, the device list. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
I was going to say, Giancarlo, I think we talked about it in the 101, but certainly the device list itself, right? You can start to sort and group devices in there based on how you've, like, the nomenclature that you've used for like zone and location, or even if you've changed the device type. But you're exactly right that this is pretty much limited to how we've configured it to date.
Yeah.
And it's the monitoring dashboards that really gives you a lot of power to bring in the devices you care about across all your agents into a single dashboard, if that's what you wish to do.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, that device list, you can filter, you can sort, but you cannot report other data like SNMP data there, or available. But in the dashboard, you basically can do that. The customized dashboard. And another question came from Bradley, and he was asking, when we probe a computer for like the system or operating system information, or even in the future patch status or application versioning or disk versioning, memory, CPU, blah, 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 which kind of credential do we use? And basically we use either SSH or WinRM as a protocol, and user need to exist local. So there should be a local credential, which of course you can create globally through the domain controller in all your sites, or in the entire, all the Windows machine on all your sites. Those were basically the two main questions we had. It's usually we take these last 5 minutes to talk about what's next now, what's coming next in Domotz. But I would like to invite everybody that is today in this webinar to attend Thursday webinar, where we will do basically a recap of everything that has been released in the last year, all the functionality. We will focus on these dashboards, the monitoring table, but we will also cover the next couple or next few months of developments. What will be our roadmap, and what should be the next features that will be introduced in Domotz in the next few months.
Yeah, one of the I already mentioned the monitoring tables, but also these custom plugins that we're doing, Giancarlo, which there's a lot of power in that. But I think on Thursday we're also going to just briefly discuss and maybe show some snapshots about how some of the dashboard, right, the knock screen, and even this next page that I'm bringing up here, right, for the device page itself, or the agent page itself, will be more useful, right, faster, more responsive. So
Correct.
I think we want to tune into that webinar where we go into a lot more details about this stuff.
I agree. I completely agree.
Good, good. Well, I want to thank everybody for your time. It looks like we're just before the top of the hour, which is perfect timing as far as I'm concerned. And I hope you all have a great day, and we look forward to seeing you on our Thursday webinar. Thank you so much.
Thank you.